Hey, and welcome back to another Just 5 Mins. How the heck are you? What have we got today? We've got fly.io or fly.io. Okay, so what is it all about? Well, if you've heard of Docker containers and the whole containerization movement that's been around, it's been going for quite some time now, where you can actually have your app running in a container, so it's all isolated. It runs on your machine, so when you deploy it to wherever you want to run these Docker containers, they just work. That's the idea anyway, and that's whether it's a microservice or just an app of traditional senses. I've even been using it for very basic JavaScript HTML stuff, which is great because you can isolate that version with those libraries and all those things. There's loads of info about Docker out there. I'm not the expert on that for sure, but the idea is sometimes it comes up though where do you actually then host those Docker containers? And of course there's a million squillion different places. Kubernetes is an orchestration to handle a lot of Docker containers and how they restart if there's failures and all those sorts of things. But you do have on all the main platforms out there, they've all got ways of getting Docker containers running for, not a lot of money, to be honest. If you're just doing the basic sort of, homegrown sort of stuff that I've been doing. Azure's got container apps. Amazon have got something similar. There's loads of these things. And again, the difference being is you're not deploying code separately that might then be relying on something else. You've got literally a contained sort of application. Anyway, so Docker is great, and those containers are made up of images. I did do a little video on it, but again, there's a lot of way better professional people doing full-on explanations about Docker container images. But an image is essentially layers of different things. So it starts with like the base OS that you want to use, and then there's layers added to it and modified. So that's where you get the efficiency, because if something minor changes on one layer, it just updates that one layer. Anyway, long story short, it uses OCI. Back in, I think it's about 2015 or something. It's the Open Container Initiative. So it's not just Docker. There's obviously is it Podman and a few others that use this, but Fly.io decided to take a slightly different approach, and one of the reasons that they mention is because the Docker containers still run obviously on a server somewhere or a cluster or whatever. Could be huge clusters of servers, but they still run on a server with an OS, and the Docker container is still technically using a kernel aspect, the low level OS. And however highly unlikely this is to actually get security issues there, it is still sharing that OS layer at the bottom. So Fly.io took a slightly different approach, which is quite clever. They're still using the OCI definition, so you can take a Docker definition file, a Docker file they call it, which is good old YAML. It's not XML, it's sort of not JSON, it's all tab into. Anyway, it's a long story about YAML as well, but it's basically a definition set of instructions, and Fly.io take that, so you can still interrupt with a Docker file essentially. But what they do, they've got microVMs, so they've got something called Firecracker, which is a virtual machine manager. Okay, I haven't really looked into that too deep. A little bit like all the virtualization stuff that's out there, Microsoft with their hypervisor and all those sorts of things. It's probably outdated that now, isn't it? But anyway, they use Firecracker. So essentially your container, as it were, is now essentially a micro VM, and it's total isolation, you see. So it's got that added advantage of it doesn't share any OS. I mean, it's still a VM ultimately running on another server, but it is locked completely. But anyway, they're lightweight micro VMs. Like I said, you can interrupt with Docker files, which is pretty useful. But the only thing is, I suppose, is that they've got their own cloud infrastructure, and they've got some very clever stuff about deploying it around on, you know, the closest edge to where your customers are and all that sort of stuff. So they've got a global infrastructure there, but you can't run Fly.io on essentially on your own infrastructure. It's using theirs, so there is a bit of a lock-in sort of thing there. I mean, they've got some brilliant everything from free pricing upwards sort of thing, but it's an interesting view. But like I said, you are, I suppose at some stage we're all locking into some sort of vendor, but that's the point with Docker though. You can say, oh, I'm going to host it on Azure. No, I'm going to move it to Amazon or Google or wherever I want to go, or run it on my own infrastructure. Excuse me. But there's the sort of catch really, is that you have to sort of buy into Fly.io's infrastructure themselves. But it's still an interesting proposition, I'm guessing. But anyway, that's what I've got. Way over 5 minutes yet again. I'll put the links below, and until the next one, I'm going to bid you a good weekend, week, whatever time of day it is in your neck of the woods, and we'll catch you on the next one. Okay, bye for now.